What's up guys, it's Double Zug. So this is going to be a very quick PSA video about the Brewfest trinkets. So let's just quickly go over the items here and then we'll talk over spec by spec, like how good they are. So first of all, we have the Mistral wristwatch. This is a passive critical strike trinket. So some of our healing specs do really like crit strike. So, you know, like Mistweaver, Discipline Priest, even a lot of the other specs like Shaman and stuff like that do like the stat decently. The equip is a spell power proc, so about 6.5k spell power for 10 seconds, 55-second ICD, 10% proc chance, so kind of a low proc chance here. And meaningfully, this is the DPS trinket, so it's procced by harmful spells. So we have a similar problem with like Yulon here with this trinket, where if you're a healer that doesn't consistently do damaging spells, you're not going to be proccing this super regularly, but a healer like Shaman or Discipline Priest, something like that, will have less of an issue proccing this trinket. Also, the fact that this procs spell power but has like the same budget as it would have for another secondary stat, like for example the Pickled Egg has the same value but it's haste. Spell power at this point is a little bit more valuable on average than most secondary stats, so this is a little tiny bit over budget in that respect. Relatively decent trinket. Again, we'll go into this spec by spec later. Alright, so the 1000-year Pickled Egg, aside from having just like disgusting flavor text and being disgusting conceptually, is a relatively decent trinket, specifically for Shaman. This is a passive intellect trinket, so 489, 1079 intellect, decent amount of intellect there. And the equip is the same proc from Wristwatch, except it procs off of healing and healing over time spells. So 10% chance, 55-second ICD, 10-second duration, and it gives us the same amount of spell power but in haste. So 6500 haste for 10 seconds. This is nice. It's kind of like Essence for Shaman, except shorter ICD, shorter duration, which I think in general is a little bit better. 2-minute ICD on Essence is a little bit rough here. So most healers do not actually want haste, but for the healers that do want haste, basically being Shaman here, I think this is a relatively good option. All right, so we're going to go spec by spec here. First, I want to mention, I do believe Volk is probably going to add these to QE. So if you want to just go to QE and look at like their prettier charts and stuff like that, you can just do that and it'll give you like a nicer breakdown here. But we're just going to go spec by spec here. So we're going to start with Holy Paladin here. Both of these trinkets are pretty mid for HPAL. You can see the 1000-year egg is pretty low here because haste's not great for Holy Paladin. Wristwatch also a little bit better here, but the problem with this is obviously it's a damage proc. So kind of like just like Yulon, like if we could proc Yulon consistently as a Holy Paladin, we'd want it. If we could proc Wristwatch consistently, it would be better than some of the Raid Finder stuff, like Spirit's Raid Finder, Chinji's Raid Finder, some of the Celestial stuff, but we can't. And the Pickled Egg is about as good as Polarizing Seal Raid Finder eye level, and a little bit worse than Spirits of the Sun. So generically what you're going to be doing for like a new alt or something is you just get like Spirits Raid Finder, and then you just get Relic Achiji, and you go with that. Or if you don't want to spend the gold on Relic, even though they're like super cheap right now, you could always just grab Egg if you want to. It's not going to be like terrible for Paladin by any means, especially for Eternal Flame, where you will get that extra tick during the proc. For Discipline here, it's a little bit of a different story. Again, 1000-year egg, very bad just because haste is totally worthless. Unless you're in a very short fight and you will benefit from the like DPS value of haste, in which case this is going to be decent. So you could have this for like just those random fights to chuck on if you don't have a second option as like a DPS trinket, and you just happen to get this if you're queuing for Brewfest for like some cosmetic stuff or whatever. You get this Pickle Egg, you could chuck it on for Windlord or something. Mithril Wristwatch is actually quite good for Discipline Priest. It's a damage proc, but again, we are damaging a lot, so we have no problem proccing this. We value highly the crit, and the spell power is also just like obviously pretty good, so this is actually better than most of the Celestial options. Problem here is that it's worse than Zen Alkstone and Relic of Yulon, so if you're Alchemy, you just are going to run Yulon Alkstone over this, but you can see it's a little bit better than like Jade Magistrate's Figurine, Spirit's Raid Finder, Chinji's Raid Finder, all this stuff. It's a little bit better than those. So this is actually a decent option for Disciplined Priests if you don't have access to these better trinkets. However, again, Alkstone's very easy to get access to, and Yulon's obviously just bought from the auction house. And also the Jade Magistrate's Figurine is super accessible, and it's also like basically the same value as this. So if you have that already, you don't need to farm. If you have like any of these other good trinkets at heroic or normal item level, it's a very small upgrade. All right, so Holy Priest is going to be very similar to Disc here. Crit is a little bit worse for Holy. Haste is still terrible though, so 1000-year Pickled Egg still quite bad. With all the Raid Finder trinket options being significantly better than Pickled Egg, Wristwatch is decent, but again, it's a damage proc, so 10% chance to proc if you're only procking this with your Solace. It's not going to have great uptime, so this is going to be much worse than it looks. I would definitely tend towards just running Spirits of the Sun Raid Finder, and then either Yulon or Relic of Chi-Ji, or even Zen Alchemist Stone. Obviously, if you're Alchemy, this is great. You can just run Alkstone plus Yulon or Alkstone plus Chi-Ji, and that will tide you over until you get access to Spirits of the Sun Heroic, Chinji's Heroic, Spirits of the Sun normal, etc. Resto Druid, we have a pretty easy decision here because 1000-Year Pickled Egg is pretty bad. The haste proc doesn't get you to the next rejuve breakpoint if you're at the first one, so it's going to be significantly less value there. However, the one thing to say for this is that it's decent for efflorescence snapshotting, especially if you don't have access to like something crazy like a heroic or a normal Essence of Terror, where you could potentially proc that on pull with your Bloodlust, your Berserking, get a really big juicy efflorescence for snapshot fights. You could use 1000-Year Pickled Egg for that, although I haven't done the math, but I don't think it's probably worth it, honestly, over some of these better trinkets. The wristwatch, if we had like good uptime, would beat out some of these other like lower raid finder celestial trinkets, but it doesn't beat out celestial Spirits of the Sun, so you're still just going to be running Spirits of the Sun celestial plus one of your Darkmoon cards, obviously Chi-Ji, but we can't proc it consistently, so it's going to be much worse than it looks here. Mistweaver here throws a little bit of a wrench in things because obviously 1000-Year Egg is going to be terrible because haste is terrible. And our Mistral with wristwatch is crit based, which is great for us, obviously. However, because this is a damage proc similar to Yu'lon, if you've ever run Yu'lon on a Mistweaver, you understand the pain of like trying to proc this with CJL and like Chi Wave. And the wristwatch has a 10% proc chance, so it's quite low. So generally speaking, for a fresh Mistweaver, I would just run something like Relic of Chi-Ji or Alkstone plus Spirits of the Sun Celestial. I wouldn't touch this, honestly. Although if you do just happen to queue this and you get the trinket to drop, it's not a terrible option, but again, you will have to track the ICD and play around it, which is kind of annoying. All right, so last year we have Resto Shaman. Resto Shaman is a bit of an exception here where 1000-Year Pickled Egg is actually good for this spec because haste is good and the haste proc is good. And also the wristwatch is decent as well. And again, even though it's a damage proc, we are going to be using Telluric Currents consistently, so you should proc this relatively frequently, although 10% proc chance, it's going to have a little bit lower uptime than like, you know, optimal or whatever, so it's going to go down a little bit here. So if you're on a fresh Shaman or an alt, or you just don't have access to like big heroic item level trinkets, I would definitely queue Brewfest on your Shaman. Either one of these trinkets is going to be decent. Both of these trinkets are significantly better than the celestial options, and obviously all like the heroics, blue trinkets and all that stuff. The exception here is going to be Relic of Yu'lon is going to be better than these trinkets significantly, and also Zen Alchemist Stone is competitive with the egg and a little bit better than the wristwatch. So if you have alchemy, your base trinkets can just be Alchstone plus Relic of Yu'lon. But again, if you don't want to spend the gold on the Darkmoon card, you can run double Brewfest trinkets on a Shaman and be just fine. All right, so that's spec by spec. What's the takeaway here? I would say if you have a fresh healer, if you're like gearing a fresh alt or something like that, and all you have access to are the Celestial Dungeon trinkets and heroic like blue trinkets, I would definitely queue Brewfest a few times on your healer just to get access to one of these, especially if you don't have access to Alkstone and you aren't willing to shell out the gold for a Darkmoon card. Getting one of these trinkets, even if it's a slight downgrade from the Celestial options, will just save you the time of farming all the shards. And they're like decent starter trinkets. You can easily go into like a normal raid with these trinkets on and not be embarrassed at all on basically all the healers. So yeah, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, etc. All the sheets are on the Discord, by the way, so you can go in there and look. I did add the trinkets there, and again, I think Volk is adding these to QE, so you can also go to QE Live and look at the like breakdown menus for trinkets by eye level. Thanks for watching. See ya.
Swobu, Zug Zug.